Hi everyone, welcome back to the Endo Smile podcast. Today we're going to be continuing our reading of Martha Beck's book, The Way of Integrity. We're on chapter 7. My name's Kisa Iqbal. I hope you enjoy this chapter. Chapter 7, When Righteousness Goes Wrong. The day I ran to the waterfall, I left part of my inferno behind, but not all of it. Not by a long shot. I was still living in that toy-fingered trap of contradiction between two radically different cultures. While I wrote my dissertation, John and I stayed afloat financially by teaching at Brigham Young University, where both our fathers had been professors. I found myself simultaneously working at one of the most conservative colleges in the country and finishing a degree from Harvard, one of the most liberal. Given my live and let live philosophy, I didn't expect this to be a problem. Ha! In hindsight, my naivete is hilarious. Every day I spent working for BYU brought head-spinning contradictions. For example, I was told that the university needed to hire more women to keep its accreditation, but on the other hand, I must not encourage female students to pursue careers since Mormonism frowned on women having jobs. In fact, some female students filed complaints saying I was setting a bad example of womanhood just by teaching them. And though I was assigned to teach sociology of gender, I was warned never to speak the incendiary word feminism. I soon realized that I'd retreated to Utah just in time to get whirled up in an ideologic tempest. Mormon leaders had begun disciplining academics for writing or teaching anything that contradicted church doctrine. For example, an anthropologist was asked to leave the church when his DNA research showed Native Americans to be descended from Siberian ancestors, not, as Mormons believe, from Middle Eastern Jews. Every professor at BYU, from geologists to historians to artists, risked expulsion from their jobs and community if they contradicted the church's doctrines. Few people outside Utah even noticed all this. I hadn't noticed it from Massachusetts, but trust me, in my home state, it was huge news. My inner social science nerd was fascinated by the conflict between religion and academia in Mormon country. It was like watching Galileo being tried for hearsay after figuring out that the earth travels around the sun, not vice versa. But to my people pleaser personality, the intense controversy I ran into everywhere I went felt like hell. Specifically, the seventh circle of Dante's Inferno, a region occupied by the violent. Errors of righteousness. After Dante trudges past the six circles of hell where incontinent sinners are punished, he finally encourages souls who cause trouble on purpose. Unlike the incontinent who weren't sure why they had sinned and never meant any harm, the people in Circle 7 set out to wreak all manner of mayhem, and they bloody well liked it. Blood looms large in Dante's seventh circle. Many of the violent are condemned to swim in a boiling hot river of it while being shot at by centaurs. Others have become trees that are continuously torn at by harpies. Still others run around on burning sand, tormented by a rain of fire. All these horrors, like everything else going on in Dante's Inferno, are contrappositions, tortures designed to resemble the sins they punish. Everyone in the seventh circle is being continuously attacked because the act of attack, with the sole purpose of causing suffering and destruction, is the essence of all violence. At this point, I want to make it very clear that violence and anger are very different things. Anger is a normal, healthy response to injustice or ill treatment. Violence, according to the Oxford Dictionary, is intended to hurt, damage, or kill someone or something. There are many points in the Divine Comedy at which Dante, Virgil, or various holy beings express anger, but the reaction is just to create justice rather than merely destroy whatever is bothering them. Anger is inequity or ill treatment seems to be embedded in our biology. We react with anger when something essential is withheld from someone who needs it, or something intolerable is being imposed. The high energy of anger helps correct unfair situations, the way a fever fires up the body to kill an invading virus. Without it, no one would leave abusive relationships, question the systemic oppression of certain populations, or work toward fairness in the world. Arun Gandhi, the grandson of the one of history's most powerful proponents of nonviolence, wrote that Mahatma Gandhi saw anger as a good thing, as the fuel for change. But when we became violent, intending solely to hurt or damage, we've joined the forces of destruction. It takes wisdom and maturity to use anger for positive change without becoming mindlessly violent. It's much easier and in the short term more gratifying to go into a psychological mode of blind attack. Even if you've never raised your hand against a living thing, you've almost certainly been violent. We all have. We've attacked other people, ourselves, or frustrating situations, if only in the privacy of our own minds. If you've ever felt a surge of rage at another driver in traffic, or checked a mirror and genuinely hated the way you looked, or cheered through your popcorn when an action adventure movie hero killed the villain, you've participated in the energy of violence, and chances are you liked it. This is just because part of our hardwiring makes us enjoy destroying things that threaten us. That's just good evolutionary policy. Any creature that lacked the will to fight when threatened would soon be dead and gone. But unlike animals, humans don't just attack clear and present physical threats. In fact, we may feel threatened by people we're dominating simply because they want to be treated better, like a dictator raging at his subjects or a racist reacting to people of color who ask for fair treatment. We're also unique in that we're frightened not only by powerful creatures that want to eat us, but by anyone or anything that may potentially change us. We're especially leery of people or ideas that might shake us out of our cultural assumptions and preconceptions. Such things feel morally threatening, and we react to them by becoming almost reflexively resistant and oppositional. This is the mindset from which all violence is born. A lot of what we may call our ideals is essentially this kind of knee-jerk combative reaction against change. Again, this reflex is different from perceiving an injustice, articulating places where that injustice causes inequality or suffering, and agitating for change. For example, Martin Luther King Jr. based his civil rights agitation on an appeal to equal rights. James Earl Ray, who killed Dr. King, was under no actual threat. His actions were based on fear of change and reflexive self-righteousness. People in the grip of their righteous minds generally believe that their personal moral codes are logical, rational, and universally true. But research shows that such judgments actually come from emotional reactions shaped by specific cultures. This means that the violent mind literally can't hear reason. It shuts down our ability to make thoughtful judgments. People who are emotionally attached to a political leader may observe that leader flagrantly violating their own values and simply not care. In fact, when people learn that their political beliefs are based on inaccurate information, they don't change their minds. Instead, they cling to their belief system more tightly than ever. Wow. This sounds irrational because it is. The part of the brain that causes us to feel the familiar ways are right, no matter what, is older, bigger, and stronger than the rational mind. One psychologist, Jonathan Haidt, compares the logical brain to a human rider sitting on the back of an illogical elephant. We assume the rider is in charge, making fair, just decisions and directing the elephant, but it's usually the elephant who's calling the shots. In Haidt's words, the rider acts as spokesman for the elephant, even though it doesn't necessarily know what the elephant is really thinking. The elephants in our head are reflexive reactions. Perceive anything unfamiliar is just plain wrong. Familiar things feel right. This is the sensation comedian Stephen Colbert famously dubbed truthiness. It's like being drunk or high, delicious in the short term, ultimately toxic. The righteous mind can temporarily overwhelm our sense of truth, including our allegiance to justice and fairness. When our righteous mind is in control, we lose the way of integrity and become weirdly, obviously self-contradictory, like proponents of world peace who advocate war against anyone who disagrees with them. Because violence and the righteous mind are closely linked, I don't call destructive action signs of violence, as Dante does. I think of them as errors of righteousness. They are psychological mistakes we make when our irrational rejection of the unfamiliar takes over our thinking. Why errors of righteousness are delicious at first. Humans depend for survival on belonging to close-knit groups of cooperating individuals. Because of that, we're biologically programmed to identify with the people who look, act, dress, talk, and think the way we do. The downside of this is a universal human tendency to mistrust anyone who seems different from our in-groups. Many tribal groups from the South African Khoikhoi to the Serbian Upite, call themselves by names that in their language mean the real people. This implies, of course, that folks from outside the group are not real people. This is called othering, and everyone does it. From early childhood, we see anything unfamiliar as weird and unnerving. The 8th century social reformer Robert Owen pointed this out in his famously ironic statement, "All the world is queer save thee and me, even thou art a little queer." So all the world is queer save thee and me, and even thou art a little queer. Once we've othered someone, we may unconsciously define them as inhuman, inferior, even abhorrent. Why the very existence of such anomalous creatures is a threat to our way of being. When we band together with our in-groups to complain about the others, our adrenaline and other fight hormones spike, giving us an intoxicating artificial sense of purpose and belonging. The more violently we speak and act, the more righteous we feel. Again, this is different from the anger we feel when we experience injustice or oppression. Healthy anger motivates discernment. It focuses on specific problems. It works toward changing conditions, and when those conditions change, it subsides. Righteous anger attacks for vague, ill-defined, or contradictory reasons and doesn't change with circumstances. It passes judgment, often without evidence. Healthy anger makes judgments, discerning what is fair and what isn't. Here's a chart to help you tell them apart. So healthy discernment, or making judgments, compels actions that reduce anger, sees all people as connected, seeks new information, learns about many topics, is able to imagine other perspectives, sees shades of gray, acknowledges it is fallible. Righteous error, or passing judgment, compels actions that increase anger, sees all people as us versus them, avoids new information, focuses obsessively on a few topics, imagines only its own perspective, sees everything as black and white, insists on its own infallibility. If we're righteous about integrity, we need to take a close look at that right-hand column. When we see ourselves described there, we're not connecting with our sense of truth. In fact, we're dividing ourselves from our innate desire to live in peace. The emotional high we may get from righteousness can blot out our genuine values, blind us to the facts about who's being harmed and who's doing the harming, and deafen us to the clear voice of integrity. If we don't question it, we may end up in a mental state of continuous attack, the Inferno's seventh circle. The vicious cycle of violence. Dante divides this level of the Inferno into 3 rings, one for people who are violent against others, another for those who turn violent against themselves, and a third for souls who were violent against God, art, and nature. The forces of creation. This metaphor reflects the 3 most common ways we can get stuck in errors of righteousness by attacking other people, ourselves, or the way things are. I've seen all 3 types of psychological violence in my practice. I once had a client I'll call Edna who looked like a sweet granny but sustained continuous simmering mental violence. She thought constantly about the way she wanted to hurt everyone, from her neighbors, whom she envied, to world leaders, whom she despised, to entire cultures whose customs she found subhuman. She spent hours each day writing blog posts about this to her 3 online followers, all of whom were bots. Another client, Brian, directed his violence at himself. Ordinarily, he was so shut down, he barely seemed to be conscious, even once he started attacking himself. "I'm nothing but the worthless, stupid piece of crap." You could see where all his energy was going. Amelia never stopped complaining about her bad luck, by which she apparently meant everything that ever happened to her. A rainstorm, a flat tire, the fact her cat avoided her. All of these felt to Amelia like deliberate violations aimed straight at her. She spent most of her mental energy striking back. All these people were using an obsession with judgment to avoid various Hellgate issues. Most of us do this. The surge of pleasure our egos get from attacking others is a great emotional painkiller. When I met Edna, She just lost her husband, and her constant angry blogging kept her from feeling her grief. Brian had always felt isolated, and his self loathing helped him numb his loneliness. Amelia was carrying a lot of childhood trauma she didn't know how to process. Constantly fussing about everything absorbed her attention, so she never had to. I doubt you hang out in Circle 7 as persistently as these folks, but you may well spend some of your time in the realm of violence. You may engage in a constant inner monologue, stating and restating your moral positions, revving up a payload of destructive rage against your enemies. You may spend all night tweeting to tell the world how bad those enemies really are. Maybe you get together with like-minded people to voice your hatred and notice that the energy climbs even though nothing in the environment has changed. People sharing a session of righteousness may go from grumbling to lashing out viciously, like a war party of chimpanzees or a clique of middle school girls. Joking aside, the fury that arises when groups share righteous rage leads directly to mob frenzies, hate crimes, and genocide. The righteous mind, at its full tilt, is completely insane. Herman Melville wrote a brilliant description of it in Moby Dick, a heartwarming story about an ordinary guy and the whale who bit off his leg. After spending his whole life hunting the great white whale, Captain Ahab dies screaming the ultimate slogan of all righteous minds. To the last I grapple with thee, from hell's heart I stab at thee, for hate's sake I spit my last breath at thee. If this is how you feel about, say, the people who keep changing the software on your smartphone, consider the possibility that you may be stuck in errors of righteousness. Allowing yourself to stand up against unfairness is healthy. Staying in constant righteous attack mode isn't. It will give you dark wood of error symptoms, just like any other departure from integrity. For example, Edna's sustained anger probably contributed to her chronic stomach ulcers. Brian's obsessive self-hatred made him so hard to be around that his wife, after hanging in for 20 years, finally left him. Amelia, constantly preoccupied with her bad luck, couldn't sustain a friendship or a steady job. When errors of righteousness run into each other, they lead to vicious cycles of mutual destruction. Throughout history, people who feel attacked by others ignore the perspective of their opponents, rev up their righteous minds, and set out to cause harm. This can trigger similar righteous mind destructiveness in others, who stop acting creatively and fight back in their own righteous rage, which makes the other side even angrier, and so on. There's a reason Dante's river of blood runs in a circle. There's no end to this madness. Notice how different this is from the clarity of people who voice their anger from a place of integrity. For example, in his bestseller, How to Be an Anti-Racist, Ibram X. Kendi freely expresses his anger at racial oppression, but he also methodically, logically, and consistently requires of himself the same fair-mindedness and wisdom he wishes to see in all people. He cautions against the righteous high that avoids the mirror. He uses the impartiality necessary to avoid errors of righteousness, even while trying to change injustice. What if anti-racists constantly self-critiqued our own ideas? What if we blamed our ideologies and methods, refined our ideologies and methods again and again until they worked? And when will we finally stop the insanity of doing the same thing repeatedly and expecting a different result? Self-critique allows change. This kind of self-scrutiny brings us back into harmony with our sense of truth. It means we apply one standard in all cases, replacing duplicity with integrity. To go from righteous mind to genuine fairness, we actually have to change brain states, go from the intoxication of violence to a clear, calm mind. Here's an exercise that can help you sober up. Exercise, fighting monsters. Step 1, pick your issue. Start by thinking of a controversial social issue you really care about. It might be gun control, immigration, capital punishment, animal rights. Any issue will do, as long as you have a strong opinion about it. And you know there are people who strongly hold the opposite opinion. Write it here. Step 2, name the others. Focus for a moment on the people who disagree with you. Imagine them en masse, marching in the streets, posting on Twitter, denouncing things you care about. Maybe you already have a phrase to describe them, like less informed voters or misguided children of God, or knuckle-dragging, scum-sucking, pea-brain Mormons. But here and now, let's just call them monsters. Step 3. Let your blood boil. Think for a moment about the way your monsters behave, the damage they do. Really feel all the anger and outrage this creates. Once your blood is boiling, fill in the following blanks as if you were writing your monsters an anonymous letter. This is for your eyes only, so don't hold back. Write what you think in your most politically incorrect moments. Don't try to make your words pretty or polite. Use a separate sheet of paper if you need more space. So, here's the prompt. To my monsters, let me be frank. Here's what I don't like about you. I'm just filling out the blank here. Here's what you do that's just plain wrong. Here's what would happen to the world if you and your kind had control of it. Here's what I hope happens to limit your power and influence. Here's what you should do, and I'm serious. Sincerely, me. Step 4. Go get the mail. Now imagine that you go to your mailbox and find an envelope addressed to you. Picture opening the envelope and finding a letter inside. Cal coincidence. It's identical to the letter you just wrote to your monsters. Right now, go back and reread the letter above, the one you just wrote, as if someone you've never heard of has written it to you. Really imagine it. As you read it, notice how your mind, body, and heart react. What happens inside you as you take in the stranger's words? Do you want to agree or cooperate with this person? Do you feel that the stranger knows, understands, and cares about you? Do you feel like opening your heart or closing down heart? You don't have to write down your answers, just feel them. If you found your letter reasonable and uplifting, congratulations. You may be acting for justice, but you're not stuck in an era of righteousness. If you're like most people, though, this exercise may have helped you see that while delivering righteous judgment feels fabulous, receiving it feels awful. When we're attacked, even with the very words we use to attack others, we feel confused, scared, misjudged, angry, rigid, and intensely inclined to lash back. As Friedrich Nietzsche wrote, beware that, when fighting monsters, you yourself do not become a monster. When we go to war on something that we see as a war on us, the ultimate winner isn't either side of the conflict, but war itself. Living in errors of righteousness wears us out and drags us down. I wish I could show you how exhausted and sick Edna felt after years of continuous anger. Brian's continuous self-attack was another tar pit of paralysis and despair. Amelia felt utterly dejected, friendless, and alone. Once we get stuck in an era of righteousness, we suffer big time. The only path that leads us from all this misery is the way of integrity. To follow it out of the seventh circle, we'll use the same steps you learned in the last chapter. Observe thoughts that cause suffering. Number 2, question them. Number 3, move on. In the next section, we'll see how this works when we confront our own errors of righteousness. The central lie of righteousness. I think there's a good reason Dante only imagined one level of hell for the violent instead of 6, as for the incontinent. There are many beliefs that cause innocent mistakes, like everyone hates me, or happiness comes from hard work, or Charles Manson is the source of all wisdom. But there's only one massive lie that turns us toward violence. It is a fundamental belief of the righteous brain. It says, I can fix everything that upsets me by destroying my enemies. Again, this doesn't mean you shouldn't react when someone tries to hurt you. If a mugger jumps you in an alley, by all means, fight back. If you see unfairness in society, speak out, put your views in writing, march for justice. But while you do these things, maintain a discerning mind that opens to new information and new ideas. When I studied martial arts, I learned over and over that we can fight most effectively when we aren't locked into a mental position of blind attack. Fighting has its place, but by itself, violence never fixes, heals, or mends anything. Its essence is destruction, never creation. Think about the previous exercise, your letter to your monsters. Recall the issues you chose for that exercise. Go into your righteous mind and feel what it does to you. Watch your body tense, your anger rise, your mind start circling like an MMA fighter in a cage. Notice that while the adrenaline surge might be intoxicating, the state of body and mind quickly is dominated by fury and discontent. Is this really the place from which anyone can increase justice, love, or peace? Now consider this thought. I can fix everything that upsets me by destroying my enemies. Write the thought down if you like, then put it under the microscope. Ask the questions you learned in the last chapter for puncturing any mental error. Are you sure you can fix this situation by destroying your enemies? Can you absolutely know that thought? I can fix this by destroying my enemies is true? If you remember how defensive you felt about receiving your very own letter to your monsters, you'll see that just attacking with no other intention can only escalate mental and perhaps physical violence. You may notice the irony of attack, of your hope that people will end up agreeing with you because you're trying to hurt them. The desire to destroy others is fundamentally hypocritical because no one, especially an attacker, wants to be destroyed. Juicy as violence feels to the righteous mind, it's internally divisive, incompatible with integrity. Values without violence. Many of my clients worry that if they lose their inner violence, they won't be motivated to resist unfairness in the world. But when we clear our minds of the righteous urge to destroy, our perceptions of wrongdoing remain clear. We can see evil, recognize it for what it is, and address it without falling back into errors of righteousness. How? By turning attention away from arguing and moralizing and focusing instead on our integrity, our deepest inner truth. Psychologist Stephen Hayes calls this connecting with our core values. His research shows that focusing on values has an almost magical ability to accomplish the very things we think we'll get by attacking our enemies. Simply shifting our attention from attacking our enemies to defining our values can reduce psychological stress responses, buffer the impact from negative judgments of others, reduce our defensiveness, and help us be more perceptive to information that may be hard to accept. Here's an exercise based on a technique Hayes uses to help clients escape destructive anger. Start by thinking of a verb and an adverb that combine to describe the way you want to live your life. It will be a phrase like teaching compassionately, loving courageously, or serving honorably. Think for a few minutes about that verb-adverb combination. Think for a few minutes about what verb-adverb combination best sums up your core values. If you could always live this way, you'd feel that you'd lived an honest and meaningful life. Got it? Write down your value here. So the prompt is the verb-adverb phrase that best describes my core value is... Just focusing on this phrase, learning joyfully, caring generously, creating unabashedly, or whatever, will change your internal state. Feel how different it is from your moral outrage, how it settles and relaxes your body, mind, heart, and soul. Now, with your core value and focus, you're ready for the next step on the way of integrity. Try this one. So here's the prompt. Exercise. Going to the mountain. Step 1. Imagine yourself in a peaceful, natural landscape. You may be on a beach, in a forest, or in a meadow. I like to imagine going to the mountains. You're alone, but everything is beautiful, calm, and completely safe. Step 2. Connect with your inner teacher. You can use the Meeting Your Inner Teacher exercise in Chapter 3. Meditate on the thought, I am meant to live in peace, or simply focus on the word peace as you breathe in and out. When you feel the quiet, calm place at your center, continue. Step 3. Recall your core values. You can write your verb-adverb combination here as a reminder. Step 4. Think of an issue that upsets you. You can use the same topic you wrote about in your monster letter or think of a different issue. Write it here. Step 5. Answer this question. In regard to the issue I've just cited, acting in accordance with the core values I just defined, what positive thing can I create? In regard to the issue I've just cited, acting in accordance with the core values I just defined, what positive change can I create? Step 6. Whatever step you wrote down in the blank above, take it. I know this sounds blunt and that working toward a better world by following your core values could take a lifetime, but it's really that simple. Each time I do the exercise above, I find myself giving different answers, thinking up different creative steps. Some are obviously related to solving a troubling issues, but sometimes they seem unrelated. Yours may surprise you. Maybe you feel motivated to read a book, plant a tree, make a bold statement online, or back off an argument. Maybe the action step that occurs to you will seem too small or too odd. Take it anyway. The moment you begin any creative activity, you leave the realm of violence, which knows only destruction. Shifting from righteous self-defense into creativity can catalyze life-changing, even world-changing action. I think that's why famous moral leaders are often creative in small ways as well as large. Gandhi not only modeled civil disobedience, but also made his own clothes, right down to weaving the cloth. Harriet Tubman, a multi-talented genius, not only helped people escape slavery, but also started her own restaurant, where she taught freed women to get paying jobs for providing goods and services for the Union Army. Eunice Kennedy Shriver, heartsick about the lack of opportunities for people with intellectual abilities, started a sports camp for children at her home that later grew into the Special Olympics. These people stood up against injustice without violence, and they were always creating things, even small things: cotton clothes, delicious food, a foot race. A closed mind is like a weapon whose only function is to harm. It grips a thought. I exist in continuous, violent reaction to whatever is threatening. By addressing problems with core values and creativity, we choose a different mode de vie. Mode de vie. I exist in continuous creative response to whatever is present. Sacrificing our reflexive tendency toward destruction gives us access to a much greater power, creation. Back when my job and education sent me in opposite directions, I spent many sleepless nights consumed by airs of righteousness. It felt like my blood was literally boiling with controversy. I didn't like the Harvard ideals that said my son's life wasn't worth living because he could never be an intellectual. But I also disagreed with Mormon leaders who were firing, shaming, excommunicating, and isolating my colleagues for knowing the wrong facts. Because these were the cultures that had shaped me, the conflict tied my mind in knots. On the one hand, I was wrestling with intellectualism. On the other, I struggled against a religion that designated intellectuals as one of the enemies of truth in the latter days. Drowning in that gory river, I grabbed for anything solid that might help me drag myself out. The truth, I thought. I need to know the truth, and so I launched my first integrity cleanse. On New Year's Eve, I made a resolution not to tell a single lie of any kind for the next full calendar year. This turned out to be a quick trip out of self-righteousness and into a clearer mind. If you ever want to try it, you can count on freeing yourself from innumerable errors, but you should also expect it to change every single part of your life. All right, that concludes chapter 7. I hope you guys enjoyed that. We're about halfway through the book. I really, really enjoyed this chapter. This was my favorite chapter thus far. Anyway, I hope you guys all have a fantastic day. Stay curious. Until next time. Bye.